somehow the emphasis on just voting and voting a certain way has become more significant than actually how we live those things out. All right, welcome to the Church Dropout channel. This is another edition of It Is What It Is. If you have not already, please like, rate, and subscribe to the channel, and also drop a comment below. We love to keep the conversation moving forward. It's voting season, and tension is rising. And for many Christians, this time of year causes major anxiety, right? The judgment, the pressure to vote a certain way, the tension in conversations about voting in politics, the misplaced moral dilemma that's placed on this one act, the hate that comes with certain choices. It's a tension-filled season, and there's a lot of anxiety. And I think some of that's undue, to be honest with you. I'm not sure the weight of this should be as it is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about these things or that these things don't matter, because they do matter a lot. However, when it causes Christians to worry and to become anxious and to even at times misplace hope and put it in the wrong area, this is a problem, right? I believe that there is something very wrong with our approach to politics and our approach in this season, I think there's some issues. To begin with, I feel like, Christians are more passionate about politics than they are about their faith, right? Christians are more likely to share their voting perspective or their position on politics more than their faith in this season. And to me, that's a problem. And I think it's reflected in how politics are discussed. So what I want to do basically is just, kind of just talk through some thoughts that I had this morning as I was just doing some reading, both in scripture, but then also, just the cultural landscape as it relates to politics. And I just want to just talk through some things, as it relates to it, and just bring out some nuances, some thoughts that I had as a result of that. So let's get into it. First thing I want to say is that, and this is just maybe a general statement about American Christianity, but I think it's reflective in how we do politics today. American Christianity is more American than it is Christian. And that is especially true when it comes to politics. It baffles me, as to why there's so much emphasis placed on voting. Like, why is there so much emphasis placed on voting, right? This is such a sore spot that Christians will disavow one another for their voting choices or affiliations. What is it about the American vote that pushes so hard? And I think that has everything to do with, American Christianity being more American than actually Christian. I just think that, somehow as Christians, we have been bamboozled into believing that our American citizenship is synonymous with our kingdom citizenship, and I think it shows in terms of how much attention is placed on this one act of voting. I'm not talking about the implications. I'm talking about the pressure that's put on this one act, and so I think we need to reprioritize and put this back into perspective, and stop putting America on the same level as Christianity. We got to remember that, the kingdom is that we are a part of a greater kingdom, and our citizenship lies in heaven, as the scripture tells us. Doesn't mean that we don't love the place where we live, but we definitely don't put the values of the place where we live above the values that the scripture commands and what Christ teaches. The second thing is, and I think it's related to the first, is that, I believe some people are confusing voting as a kingdom right. Voting is not a kingdom right. God will not be judging us based on what we did in the ballot booth, in the voting booth. Like, God is not going to be judging us on what we did in the voting booth. I mean, he's not going to say, hey, you cast a vote for this individual. That's not what God is going to say. But God will, judge us based upon how we demonstrated our Christian ethic and values and how we live those values out in the world, right? Voting is not a kingdom right. It's an American privilege, right? Whatever you want to call it, but it is not a kingdom right. It's not something that we are judged by in the kingdom. So why are we judging one another on it, right? Why are we judging one another on it? And by judging, even to the point of one's salvation, why are we judging one another based upon a right that is not a part of the kingdom? Another thing that I was thinking about this morning is you'll hear a lot during this season. You'll hear a lot of a vote for something is a vote against, right? That if you vote for something, then you are against, then you're voting against something else. Now, I don't believe that. I think we are more nuanced as people. I think you can be for something, and you can vote for something and also be for what you're voting against, so to speak, right? Like, I don't think that just because you're casting a vote for this one thing means that you're against everything else. I think it's more nuanced than that. So voting for something doesn't automatically make you a champion. I mean, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Let me just separate these two sentences. Well, actually, let me just start that over, right? You'll hear in this season that a vote for is a vote against, right? A vote for is a vote against, meaning that if you vote for one candidate or you vote for one policy, that means you're against this candidate or this policy or what they stand for. Let me just be plain blunt, right? Like, so if you vote for a Democrat, then you don't care about pro-life. You're against pro-life, right? As if you can't be Democrat and pro-life at the same time, right? As if there's no nuance in that. But I want to add to that, or maybe even give a little bit of a caveat, right? I don't believe that a vote for something is a vote against something necessarily. And I also don't believe that voting for something makes you a champion for it. I don't believe voting for something makes you a champion for it, right? Like, I don't believe that because you voted for a pro-life, quote unquote, pro-life candidate, that makes you a champion for something, right? So if you vote for a candidate that is pro-life and against abortion, that makes you a champion for it. And let me give you an example of why I don't believe that. Well, one is because, again, I think it's an overemphasis on the act of voting. And like I said before, I think it's misunderstanding what we will be judged by. But let me give you an example of why I don't believe that. 5% of practicing Christians have adopted, right? 5% of practicing Christians have adopted, right? And so, and let me even add to that. So 5% of practicing Christians has adopted. That's according to Barna. And I guarantee that more than 5% of Christians voted pro-life. Okay. So what I'm saying is that there's far more emphasis on how we vote pro-life than there is on how we live pro-life. And so what I'm saying is that a person can vote pro-life and not be pro-life in their own life. Okay. So just because you vote for something doesn't make you a champion for it. It doesn't make you a champion for it. And I'm not trying to shame people for not adopting. What I'm trying to say is that if we are pro-life, then our pro-life should show in every aspect of our life, right? Again, somehow the emphasis on just voting and voting a certain way has become more significant than actually how we live those things out. And so, so I don't believe it's true that voting for something is a vote against something else. But I also don't think it's true that because you voted for something, that means that you're a champion, right? A champion for that is someone who's actually living that out in their everyday life, right? It's not just about what we do on one day by casting a vote. It's about how we live these things out. Another thing I was thinking about was it was Romans 13 and how this is used during this time period. And I'm not going to exegete this whole passage. I'm just going to say this. The thrust of Romans 13 is not Christian obedience to the government. That's not the thrust of Romans 13. The greater context of Romans 13 is the love chapter, right? Where the scripture talks about love and how we ought to love one another. And I think the thrust of Romans 13 is not how Christians submit to the government, but how Christians have a job to do. And our job is different than that of the government. And in there specifically, Paul says, that, we shouldn't have to worry about vengeance, right? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. We don't repay evil for evil as Christians, right? But God has a government that's going to, enact vengeance on our behalf and right wrongs and injustices and different things of that sort. And so the thrust of it is that let the government do what the government does, and you as a Christian do what you're supposed to do. You don't repay evil for evil. There's an institution that's been set up for that. You love your enemies, right? So the thrust of Romans 13 is not an act of obedience. The thrust of Romans 13 is being faithful as a Christian, how we ought to live in society and in the world. And then, there are a ton of other things that we got to ask, even in this passage, right? What government is Paul talking about? There are plenty of governments in this world today that Christians are under. Which one do we listen to? What if those governments are in opposition to one another? There's a lot of questions that go into that. But the thrust of Romans 13 is not Christian obedience to government. The thrust of Romans 13 is faithfulness as a Christian to carry out the law of love that God has put into place for his body, and that we don't repay evil for evil, or we don't seek vengeance, because God has an institution of that. So we're free to do what the gospel enables us to do. And so, again, this Romans 13 thing, I think, is part of the fuel that, overemphasizes how we should vote and how we should, play our politics. So just a couple more things here, and then I'm done. I think we need to stop reducing the Christian faith to fit this either or category. I think we're reducing the Christian faith to these two ideas that are really, or should really, be in submission to Christianity, but instead we're trying to fit Christianity into, or the Christian faith into, one of these categories, right? So what we do is we list out which one of these is more Christian, and it's just a false question to begin with. Neither one of them is. Neither one of them is. Neither one can hold or contain the kingdom, and they shouldn't be able to. And I think we should quit reducing the Christian faith to that, right? Christians are pro-life, and we're pro-life from the womb to the tomb. We're not just pro-life on unborn children, but we're pro-life for everyone, right? And again, and then what happens is which one is more important, and this, that, and this. Okay, now we're reducing our Christian faith and our obligation to certain categories. And I think we need to stop reducing the Christian faith to fit this either or category. I think Christians exist outside of these categories. Christianity is an alternate reality. It is a new reality. It is not a kingdom that submits to other kingdoms. It's its own kingdom. It's its own empire. And I think we got to quit treating the Christian faith as if it's not, and thinking that it could fit into this either or category. And the last thing that I'm going to say is, as I said earlier, this is a time of tension. This is a time of anxiety. This is a time that Christians, get into this horrible mental space. I just want to say this, don't be distracted by American politics. Don't get distracted. The mission is more important. Don't get distracted by American politics. Listen, the reality is this. I think what's being demonstrated now, especially in American politics, is I just think this is what's happening in America overall. I think that there is work that's being done in tearing down all of these institutions that we've placed our faith in. outside of Jesus. Our hope has lied in our ability to legislate laws, and I think that this is one of the things that's being shown, right? That no, the government is not big enough to contain the hope of humanity. Only Jesus is. And when we get distracted by American politics into believing that there's so much weight that's put on this one action of voting, and that you got to get this thing right, and the implications of this thing are huge, that's a problem. And I think we should resist that, and I think we should fight against that. The reality is yes, it's important, but it's not bigger than the mission, and our hope doesn't lie in our vote. Our hope, who is the King of all, right? Who is the supreme being over everything, right? Who is the ruler of this world and the world to come, and we got to think that way. So in saying that, don't be distracted. The mission is more important. Don't put all of your emphasis and your hope in politics. I know that seems like common sense, but look at how your emotions are being swayed, right? Pay attention to what you care most about, right? Our majority of your conversations, how are your conversations going when you speak about these things? Is your heart rate raising? Is your sense of security leaving? But the scripture is clear: be anxious for nothing, but in all things by supplication and prayer. So we need to trust God, and that is the foundation of it. So as usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you have not already, please like, rate, and subscribe, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And that's it. Thank you for tuning in. God bless.